Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mighty Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Thousand Autumns Volume 5, also known as Tianqiu by Meng Xi Shi, and we'll be covering all 4 side stories in this video, so I hope you all enjoy. Side Story 1. Behind the folding screen there was a bed. On top of the bed lay a beauty. More precisely, the beauty's eyes were slightly shut, and he was in a deep slumber. Next to him sat a man who was currently watching the beauty. Yan Wushi stared at him for a long time, then gently placed his hand on Shen Chao's eyelashes, brushing his fingers over them. Shen Chao's eyelids reflexively fluttered, and then he knitted his brows just a little bit. It was rare for him to sleep so soundly. On an extraordinary day, even the slightest movement within his surroundings would jolt Shen Chao awake, never mind Yan Wushi running his hands over his face. It was clear that Shen Chao was much too tired. The corners of Yan Wushi's mouth pulled up in a satisfied, relaxed smile. If anyone else had been here, they were sure to suffer a shock great enough to send goosebumps to ripple through their body. This smile of his was far too gentle, so gentle that it shouldn't have appeared on his face at all. Even Yan Wushi himself probably hadn't noticed the appearance of this refreshing smile upon his face. His fingers moved from Shen Chao's eyelashes to the spot right between his eyebrows, then slowly slid down from there until he reached the tip of his nose. Then he made to gently pinch that nose. Yet, before he actually did it, he seemed to change his mind and continued to sweep downward. He pinched Shen Chao's lips into a flat line, and this lovely picture of a sleeping beauty during spring immediately took on a comical touch. Shen Chao's upper and lower lips had been squished together, and now it looked like he had a duck's beak. Shen Chao remained completely unaware. Perhaps he simply had no guard when it came to the person next to him, and he was content to continue wandering within his dreams. Secretary Yan had finally realized that his actions were a bit childish. He smirked as he let go, then lowered his head to kiss Shen Chao's mouth. From the corner of his eyes, he glimpsed the specks of green and purple pattering on Shen Chao's neck and shoulders. The corner of his lips curved as he yanked the blankets up so that the man's neck was snugly covered. A knock sounded at the door, and Yan Wushi rose and left the bed to answer it. He didn't blush when the concierge outside saw his languid appearance, complete with a draped outer robe and mussed hair, but that concierge turned bright red. "Good morning, sir. The kitchen downstairs has been lit, and the innkeeper had this lowly one come up to ask if you two needed anything." As he asked, he furtively tried to peek inside. Several hours ago, they'd heard rattling noises while downstairs. They hadn't dared to come up and ask at the time, but now he was naturally checking whether they'd broken anything. Yan Wushi had wanted to decline at first, but then he reconsidered. "What food do you have?" The concierge smiled. "We have Western-style baked cakes, roast chicken, grilled duck, okra, and so on. Our humble store has some of the best cooking in the area. Generally, we'll be able to fulfill any order you wish to make." "Then let's have some buttermilk barley congee and pork trotters simmered in garlic. The trotters should be stewed until they're extra tender, and no need to hold the sauce. I'll be sure to reward you properly after. Prepare some fresh fish, too. It doesn't matter which kind as long as it's fresh. Nothing fancy. Just steam it and add scallions and garlic. As for the rest, prepare some vegetable dishes and send them over." Accompanying his words, a silk pouch landed in the concierge's arms. It was heavy, and the concierge guessed that it was full of silver nuggets. Yan Wushi rattled off that long list without even a blink. The concierge was left secretly astounded as he thought that this guest really knew how to eat. It seemed that he was a rich nobleman buried in luxuries. Just this man's receipt for today alone could match 3 or 5 days of the inn's regular business earnings. Yes, whatever this gentleman wishes for, our inn has it all," the concierge said attentively. "This lowly one will go and make the preparations right now. Please wait a moment, and this lowly one will send some hot water over first." Yan Wushi also bid the concierge to go to the bookstore and purchase a couple of scrolls for light reading. With such a generous reward at hand, The concierge was naturally willing to do anything for him, and he quickly completed each task one by one. It was the fragrance of food that woke Shunchao up. The moment his eyes opened, he felt his stomach rumble with hunger. It'd been such a long time since he'd had this feeling. He found it somewhat unfamiliar and disorienting. Shunchao blinked, then slowly scanned the room, his eyes moving from the table behind the folding screen, covered in dishes, to the silhouette sitting by the desk and reading. In an instant, his vision transformed from confused and blurred to wakeful clarity. As there was only a folding screen between them, Yen Wushi had naturally noticed his noises and movements. Ah Qiao is awake. He put down his book, stood up, then circled around the screen. He was a little regretful that he'd been one step too slow to catch the sight of Shunchao waking up. But the next moment, Shunchao yanked the covers over his head and he burrowed into the nest of blankets. The covers suddenly bulged into a massive dome. Yen Wushi was silent. A single glance at the covers as they shifted around told him that Shunchao must be putting on his clothes beneath them. Yen Wushi's stomach was almost cramping from laughter, but he kept his expression flat as he faked concern. "Are you all right?" Shunchao's muffled voice came from behind the curtain. "I'm fine." Yen Wushi came forward a few steps and pressed a hand to the covers. "Ah Qiao, are you injured? Come out and let me see." "I'm really fine." The rustling beneath the covers grew terribly fierce. Yen Wushi guessed that he must be looking for his pants. Smiling, he said, "Ah Qiao, I forgot to tell you. Your underwear... Your underpants were soiled last night, so I had the concierge head out to buy a new pair. He hasn't returned yet." The covers were suddenly flung aside and a slightly reddened face poked out. "How could you let a stranger buy that?" "Then should I go and personally buy them?" Shunchao held his forehead, then mumbled somewhat incoherently. "That's not what I meant. How did he know my measurements?" Yen Wushi smiled. "I told him, of course." Shunchao didn't ask how Yen Wushi knew. It was obvious how. Yen Wushi must have measured him last night while he was feeling him. Recalling the mad frenzy from last night, Shunchao desperately wished to just crawl into a crack in the ground and hide there. Up to just now, in fact, when he had the covers over his head, he could still smell that thick, strong scent within his own breaths. He gave a dry cough, feeling awkward, but he couldn't not answer. "Sec Leader Yen." Yen Wushi interrupted him, his brows knit in displeasure. "We're this intimate now, yet you insist on calling me Sec Leader Yen." "Then what should I call you?" Shunchao asked, his words faltering. "Yen Lang. You called me that many times last night, didn't you? You were even crying at the same time." Shunchao's entire face was flushed crimson. "Stop talking." Yen Wushi sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. "We've now had intimate relations. If we were a man and a woman, I'd have already asked you to go through all the traditional marriage etiquette with me, like the 3 matches and 6 appointments. Then I'd marry into your family, and you could bring me over the threshold. Unfortunately, you're not." "Wait." Hearing this, Shunchao felt like something was off. "Why are you marrying into mine?" Yen Wushi raised an eyebrow. "Unless you want to marry into mine instead?" Shunchao said, "No, of course not." "My venerable self likes you. I don't care about dignity or reputation. Of course, I'd have no objections if you'll let me marry you. That way, bystanders won't start criticizing or gossiping about the great and lofty Xuandu Mountain sect leader. I don't have any reputation to speak of. If it's for your sake, any grievance is no grievance at all." These words might have sounded egotistical, but there was still a hint of grievance within them as well. Shunchao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "That's not what I meant." "Then, will you take responsibility or not?" Shunchao was speechless. Ultimately, what happened last night had been completely consensual. With Shunchao's sincere personality, it was impossible for him to push the entire responsibility onto the other person. Yen Wushi was banking on this. Hence, he lured Shunchao forward, bit by bit, then let him leap into the pit he'd long dug beforehand. Sure enough, Shunchao's brows pinched for a long time before finally he arduously spat out 2 words. I will. Yan Wushi smiled slightly, then leaned over to kiss his cheek. Shenlong. Shen Chao shuddered. Yan Wushi said gently, Shenlong, you still haven't put on your underpants. Aren't you cold? Shen Chao's face flushed red, and he clutched at the covers, refusing to let go. By this time, the concierge had purchased the underpants and returned. He knocked on the door, and Yan Wushi went to answer it, then brought the underpants back with him. Shenlong, how about I help you dress? Shen Chao couldn't take it anymore. Just continue calling me Ah Qiao. Yan Wushi had a look of utter helplessness. You refuse to call me Yanlong, and you won't let me have this satisfaction either? Shen Chao would not let him continue this twisted teasing. He snatched up the pants and continued to dress, pulling them on beneath the covers. Only then did he remove the covers, get off the bed, and prepare to fasten his sash. It would have been fine if Yan Wushi didn't look. The moment he did, he couldn't stop himself and burst out laughing. My dear Ah Qiao, you put your pants on backwards. Shen Chao was speechless as he flushed as red as a fully cooked shrimp. Side Story 2. The gates to the Taoist monastery had been left unlatched. The osmanthus flowers were in full bloom. A refreshing breeze blew, and the clouds were sparse. The sky looked like colored glaze, as clear and bright as ice. Cluster after cluster of pale yellow and silvery white clasped the branches, weighing them down so much they were almost overloaded. There were even several small birds hopping about on them. The branches swayed gently, causing petals to flutter down with every motion. They scattered all over the head of the deer standing below. The deer tossed its head several times until it couldn't help but let out a sneeze. On the low table to the side was a cup. No tea had been poured yet, but quite a few petals had made their way inside. There was a teapot simmering away on low heat, its aroma wafting and mingling with the fragrance of osmanthus. The rich, refreshing scent was balanced in a marvelous equilibrium, and anyone who passed by would find comfort permeating throughout their entire body. The petals fell and tea brewed, the Taoist monastery tranquil and quiet. It was undoubtedly a scene pleasing to the heart and eye both, something to be painted. But Yang Guang was focused on something else. He was looking at the man brewing the tea. The man in question wore a Taoist robe, his hair pulled back into a bun. It was a simple manner of dress that couldn't have been more ordinary. But Yang Guang was forced to admit that the simpler the dress, the more it enhanced how outstanding the man himself was. How long had it been since the first time he'd laid eyes on this person? Yang Guang didn't think too hard about it, but he'd aged from a youth into a young man since then, so it must have been a fair number of years. Yet this man was truly like an immortal, for he showed no signs of aging. Of course, Yang Guang knew that once someone's martial arts reached a certain level, they'd maintain their youth indefinitely, just like this man. It was said that such people weren't uncommon in the Jianghu, but because this man's looks were exceptional, every time they met, Yang Guang couldn't help but glance at him a few more times. The man had made a deep impression on Yang Guang. Our backyard is too humble to properly receive guests. If your highness is here to ask about immortality, please head to the front door. The voice, clear yet mild, rang out from behind the door. Yang Guang felt slightly awkward and couldn't help glancing at the man next to him. The man's eyes were lowered, a slight frown upon his face, but his expression was tranquil. Even though he'd been waiting together with Yang Guang for a while now, he showed no sign of impatience, nor any hint of embarrassment at being called out. It was as if he were truly only here to accompany Yang Guang on his visit, keeping his own presence as low profile as possible. Since he'd been discovered, Yang Guang simply chose to laugh and push open the gates to enter. This prince noticed how quiet and beautiful the monastery was, so he decided to tour the area in passing and unexpectedly ended up here. I've disturbed the perfected master's peace. I beg your forgiveness. Though he said this, he had no plans of leaving. Instead, he boldly walked in, completely certain that the master of the monastery couldn't refuse him. Yang Guang's life had been smooth sailing since he was young. His parents' doting ensured that he encountered no dissatisfactions or imperfections along the way. So his personality had naturally become rather self-important. So it was the Prince of Jin. Please come in. Shen Chao gave a slight smile, showing absolutely no hint of displeasure. Yang Guang thought that the man didn't dare to show any. If Xuandu Monastery wished to hold on to its place in Chang'an, it needed the support of the imperial court. As he'd been peeping in from outside, he'd inevitably committed some discourtesies. At this moment, Shen Chao didn't rise to greet him, and Yang Guang wasn't shameless enough to fuss about it. He simply lifted the hem of his robe and sat down across from the other man. Then he took the initiative on behalf of the host and gestured for the person accompanying him to sit as well. Just now, I smelled the tea the perfected master was brewing and couldn't help but stop because of it. I trust that the perfected master won't be offended by our sudden visit. Shen Chao smiled. Of course not. But who is this guest with you? Yang Guang pretended to be annoyed at himself. I forgot to introduce him to the perfected master. This man is Great Master Zhizhi's disciple, the Buddhist monk Yushu. To elaborate, he's also my father's Shidi. Buddhist Master Zhizhi was from Tiantai sect, a martial brother of Fa Yi and Xueting. 2 years ago, in order to bring the Buddhist discipline under control, Yang Jian had willingly tossed aside his dignity as an emperor and acknowledged Buddhist Master Zhizhi as his master, demonstrating just how much he valued Buddhism. Once news of this incident spread, Buddhism's reputation and standing had exploded, their limelight bright beyond compare. However, though Buddhist monk Yushu had no hair whatsoever, he was dressed in common wear rather than a monk's robes. Hearing his identity, Shen Chao couldn't stop surprise from coloring his expression. I've brought the Buddhist monk to a Taoist monastery. Is the perfected master unhappy? Shen Chao smiled. Of course not. All who come are guests. If the Prince of Jin and the Buddhist master don't mind, please have a taste of this humble Taoist's coarse tea. Yang Guang gave a carefree smile. Since it's tea that the perfected master personally brewed himself, I must have a taste. Then I can go home and boast to my parents later. He and Yushu took the teacups and lowered their heads to give the tea a sip. It was indeed a coarse tea, though it carried a fragrance of osmanthus blossoms that couldn't conceal the bitter astringency of the tea itself. Yang Guang was completely unaccustomed to drinking something like this. After one small sip, he frowned and put down his bowl, then glanced at Yushu. The monk was quietly holding his cup in both hands, taking sip after sip of tea, neither fast nor slow. Soon he'd finished the entire cup. It seems that I'm the one who doesn't understand tea, said Yang Guang self-depreciatingly. It was a waste to gift it to me. The Prince of Jin speaks too seriously, said Shen Chao. The tea leaves have already been brewed. It is meant to be drunk. Whether the Prince of Jin or someone else drinks it makes no difference. The tea exists regardless of whether it's in your stomach, so there's no waste to speak of. Yang Guang started. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Instead, it was Yushu who spoke. The perfected master's words reflect the will of Buddhism. Shen Chao gave a slight smile. Buddhism and Taoism share many common points. It seems that the Buddhist master is rather compatible with Taoism. Yushu also smiled. People say that the perfected master isn't good with words, and that's why he refuses to open public lectures to speak of the Tao. But this humble monk sees that it's untrue. The perfected master knows the art of debate very well. His appearance had always been refined and delicate, yet the smile was as bright and charming as a flower. It left a strong impression. While Master Yushu has apprentice under Great Master Zhizhi, he also learned martial arts from his shibo, Great Master Fa Yi, said Yang Guang. They say that he's a genius who only appears once every couple of decades, that his aptitude is even higher than that of Xueting's. But I was born too late to witness how formidable Buddhist monk Xueting was. Could I have the fortune of watching Yushu seek some martial guidance from the perfected master? Shen Chao swept his gaze over both of them before it landed on the teacup in front of him. With Buddhist Master Yushu's aptitude, he'll likely see great achievements within a couple of years. This humble Taoist is incompetent. How could he carelessly offer pointers? This was rejection. Yang Guang was deeply unhappy. He'd wanted to make friends with Shen Chao and Yan Wushi, but news of the latter's whereabouts came and went, and even when they did meet, Yan Wushi never gave Yang Guang any face. Once, unable to contain himself, Yang Guang had gone and tattled to his parents, but he hadn't expected that the parents who'd always indulged him would react opposite to how they usually did. They didn't take his side, which left Yang Guang even more frustrated. As for Shen Chao, Yang Guang had attempted to visit him several times. Each time, he'd been met with either the cold shoulder or polite rejection. Shen Chao seemed wholly uninterested in associating with Prince of Jin. Even if he remained courteous, he was also distant. For someone like Yang Guang, he was the pride of the heavens. This was undoubtedly equivalent to slapping him in the face multiple times. More than once, it had made Yang Guang so furious that he'd returned to his sleeping quarters and smashed things. But this only made him more unwilling to give up. Instead, he'd developed an obsession with what he couldn't obtain. His only consolation was that Huanyue sect in Xuandu Mountain, while demonstrating no signs of accepting him, showed no intentions of growing close with the crown prince either. As he looked at Shen Chao's handsome and gentle profile, Yang Guang felt somewhat defeated and resentful. Shen Chao had saved his life, and Yang Guang knew it. That year, the traitor Cheng Gong had held him hostage as he left the palace, and Shen Chao had rescued him. But Yang Guang thought that his parents had given Xuandu Mountain enough over the years to repay the favor of Shen Chao saving his life. So deep within his heart, Yang Guang actually held little gratitude toward Shen Chao. More than anything else, this connection was an excuse to build a closer relationship, to pull Xuandu Mountain over to his side. Unfortunately, Shen Chao was always the same, neither cold nor warm. It matched the distance that Xuandu Mountain kept from the Prince of Jin. But it was one thing to think this. Yang Guang didn't dare reveal any trace of rudeness or disrespect in his expression. The perfected master is too modest. If we consider the seniority within the Jianghu, Yu Xu is even your esteemed self's junior. It's a given that he should receive your guidance. However, if you're unwilling, we naturally can't force you. In a few days, it will be the double ninth festival. I've also reported to His Majesty that we'll be holding a banquet in the spare villa on Cuihua Mountain. Would the perfected master do the honor of attending? This prince warmly welcomes you, naturally. Now that he'd said this, he was afraid that Shen Chao would think the venue too crowded and be unwilling to attend, so he made sure to add some more. The banquet won't have any unconcerned persons. There will only be famed literati from the schools of Taoism and Buddhism. We're following the example of the scholarly discussions from the Wei and Jin dynasties. It certainly won't be a lowbrow affair. Shen Chao looked apologetic. It's most unfortunate. This Taoist is about to set out for Xuandu Mountain today. He fears that in a few days he'll be on Xuandu Mountain and hence unable to attend the banquet. He begs the Prince of Jin's forgiveness. Fury swept across Yang Guang's face, but he quickly recovered his smile, then picked up his teacup and drank everything in one go. I was the one asking something impossible. The perfected master need not be concerned. After Yang Guang and Yu Xiu left, someone spoke from behind the colonnade with a leisurely voice. You really offended him. Shen Chao didn't turn his head, but simply sipped a few mouthfuls of tea as he said, Sect Leader Yan was cowering within his house like a turtle, so I was forced to play the villain. Yan Wushi laughed. Who made Taoist Master Shen so compassionate and kind? If I'd come out instead, that Yu Xiu probably wouldn't be able to leave the gates of Xuandu Monastery. Shen Chao sent him a pointed look, but he said nothing. Yan Wushi bent at the waist and brushed his lips over the side of Shen Chao's face, leaving a trail of heat from his breath in his wake before he finally stopped at Shen Chao's ear. This venerable one originally planned on returning to celebrate Qixi with you. I didn't make it in time, but at least I won't miss the winter solstice. Shen Chao's face was a little red. It was unclear whether he had been warmed by Yan Wushi's breath or if he was blushing from shyness. Your trip was rather long this time. Yan Wushi gave a low chuckle and continued to tease him. So, Taoist Master Shen missed me? Blasted by these words, Shen Chao's face grew even redder. You know I wasn't asking this. Then what were you asking about? Yan Wushi seemed to take great enjoyment in teasing him, and he also appeared very interested in Shen Chao's ear. He took it into his mouth and refused to let go. He licked from the lobe to the shell until it was wet from his tongue all over. Shunchao had gone completely stiff, as if he'd been immobilized by a martial technique. He was unable to move at all. Did you... He arduously mobilized his willpower. Enter the heart of the Kaganaté? No. I went to Goguryeo. Yan Wushi even rattled off a few sentences in fluent Gogurian as his hands reached deep into certain unspeakable places, roaming freely about. Goguryeo. What did you go there for? Ginseng is plentiful there, so it's a trade location for Huanyue sect. I passed through the eastern Kaganaté on the way there, so I took the chance to look around. Duan Renyang is currently doing quite well there. He's even been elevated by the Tulan Kagan, Yong Yulu. He's practically become Hulagu the second now. Shunchao shook his head. As his heart isn't on the path of martial arts, he'll never become a second Hulagu. I find that monk Yushu from earlier much more interesting. What? Said Yan Wushi. Is having me not enough for you? You want a monk too? Shunchao's face instantly flushed red, his mouth falling open as he stammered. He was angry and wanted to refute Yan Wushi, but he didn't know where to start. It made for a pitiful and lovable sight. Yan Wushi couldn't help but burst out laughing. He picked Shunchao right up like a princess and carried him inside. Side Story 3. It was the night of the winter solstice. The lanterns had been hung. Tiny specks of firelight glistened beneath the eaves. Shining through the thin sheet of red paper, together they formed a line of crimson that illuminated the entire courtyard. The snow continued to fall in drifts, neither great nor little. Yet it was enough to turn the whole world white. It blanketed the rooftops, the grounds, the trees, all the same. Martial arts practitioners did not fear the cold. The door to the house was open, but there was no wind, so no snow fluttered inside. Sitting within the house, they could use earth dragons for warmth and even enjoy the snowy scenery. 2 birds with 1 stone. This wasn't Xuandu Monastery, but the former junior preceptor's residence in Chang'an, now known as the Duke of Wu's residence. After Yang Jian succeeded, he'd done as Yuan Yong had and named Yan Wushi the junior preceptor, then made him a state duke. In truth, everyone knew that this was only a title and nothing more. It didn't matter what Yan Wushi was called. Even if he'd been declared a general or marquis, Yan Wushi would remain the same Yan Wushi, and Huanyue sect the same Huanyue sect. No one could affect his standing. Compared to Yuan Yong, Yang Jian had a deeper understanding that the emperor alone was unable to call all the shots. There were many rich and powerful families, all with long-established histories and influence, which meant that even rulers were forced to heed their opinions. Seeking to break free from the power held by such families, he proclaimed a new system of imperial examinations, completely different from the 9-rank system that had been in place since Wei and Jin. This allowed numerous scholars from humble families to propel themselves upward by passing the exams. But this meant that the authority that had originally belonged to the officials responsible for selecting new ministers no longer existed, instead being reclaimed by the emperor. Scholars from humble backgrounds were naturally delighted, but the noble families were not. Therefore, in order to contend with their immense power, it was impossible for a long time for Yang Jian to toss Huanyue sect aside. As for Xuandu Mountain, the current cornerstone of Taoism, it was better to win them over instead of throwing them away. As the founding emperor of a dynasty, Yang Jian naturally understood this. His preferential treatment toward Buddhism was a given, but he didn't forget to indulge the Taoists with various favors either, wanting to maintain a balance between the 2 schools. Meanwhile, he also put great effort into supporting Confucianism, establishing Sui as an equal competitor to Southern Chan and pulling their talents over. The disparity in strength between the North and the South grew clearer with each passing day. Seeing that a battle between the 2 was inevitable, people's hearts gradually began to waver, and indeed, quite a few of the South's scholars traveled north to Chang'an to take the Northern Dynasty's imperial examinations. With how bright the Northern Dynasty's future was, everyone thought the same. that if things went as expected, the Central Plains that had been fragmented since Wei and Jin would once again see unification in the future. However, at this moment, the man sitting within the junior preceptor's residence and facing the snowy courtyard did not look happy at all. The reason was thus. In front of him was a bowl of dumpling soup. More precisely, it was a bowl of dumpling soup made using lamb broth at the base, with tangyuan mixed in. Shunchao gave a slight frown. Staring at this bizarre medley, Shunchao had no idea what expression he should make. A man stepped out from behind the screen, saw his expression, and smiled. The winter solstice is equally important as New Year's. The north eats dumpling, the south tangyuan, and in the riverlands they drink lamb soup. Now all three have been assembled, allowing you to experience a gathering of all the lands. Why are you unhappy? Shunchao shook his head. I don't enjoy eating them this way. Tangyuan should be a sweet food, so why is it mixed with lamb soup? Did someone come up with this to please the emperor? Yan Wushi lightly clapped. You guessed correctly. At the winter solstice's banquet this year, the Prince of Jin came up with this method to please the emperor. He even named it the Soup of Unity, meaning that the entire world will be united as one. Yang Jian was delighted and handsomely rewarded him right there. The crown prince was on the scene as well, and his expression was quite spectacular. The banquet for the winter solstice had been held yesterday, when Shunchao was away from the capital. He hadn't needed to attend, but Yan Wushi had gone. To him, it was the same as going to watch a good show. Shunchao lightly exhaled, letting out a puff of white. When someone grows up, their thoughts grow complex as well. The Prince of Jin is more eloquent than the Crown Prince, so his parents pamper him more. This is reasonable. But I've seen darkness lurking within his expression, and there's a certain malice in his eyes. I fear he won't be satisfied remaining the Prince of Jin for long. Yan Wushi gave a slight sneer. Weren't his thoughts already complicated as a child? Hearing this, Shunchao couldn't help but cast his mind back to that time when Yang Guang had viciously stabbed Chunggong. Does the emperor intend to appoint the new crown prince? He asked. Others would have been horrified at this topic, but to them, it was something trivial and ordinary, nothing to take seriously. Not now, perhaps, but it's hard to say in the future, Yan Wushi replied. If everything proceeds as expected, there will be a southern campaign to Chun next year. If Yang Jian and Lady Dugu truly preferentially favor Yang Guang, they will definitely make him a marshal to let him have some military exploits. He sat down next to Shunchao and wrapped his arms around his waist, then lowered his head to take a bite as he scooped up a dumpling. This taste isn't bad at all. Here, shall this husband feed you? Yan Wushi made to hold out the wooden spoon to Shunchao, and sure enough, received a glare for his troubles. Sec Leader Yan, please have some dignity. Though several years had passed, this man's skin remained as thin as paper, unable to take the slightest bit of teasing. But the more he saw this, the more Yan Wushi loved teasing him. Dignity. But you didn't seem to be worried about my dignity last night. Before Shunchao could say anything to spoil his fun, Yan Wushi grabbed his chin and passed him a mouthful of soup. For a moment, everything fell silent. There was only the faint rustling of falling snow outside, punctuated with the soft sounds of lips and tongue meeting within the house. It was some time before Shunchao finally shoved away the man who was glued to him. We're talking about serious matters, he panted. Don't just start fooling around. This is called having some fun. It was obvious that Shunchao did not approve of this kind of fun, and contorting his expression further was the lingering taste of lamb soup in his mouth. This kind of lamb soup, mixed with tangyuan and dumplings, he really had to excuse himself. He thought about the winter solstice banquet, where quite a few people must have struggled to appreciate this soup of unity. But with the emperor's enthusiasm hanging over them, who would have the nerve to say so? Shunchao sighed. As an emperor, Yang Jian is indeed wise, so I feel like my choice was correct. It's only when his children are involved that he becomes somewhat foolish. Now that it's already decided which son will be king and which will be subordinate, he shouldn't flaunt his favoritism for his second son so much in public. What kind of position does that put his eldest in? Yan Wushi tried to grab him, but then he saw Shen Chao nimbly tuck his hand back into his sleeve, and some regret came over his expression. "This isn't hard to understand," he said. "Many brilliant people have a blind spot when it comes to a certain subject. Yang Jian and Lady Dugu are the same. If this continues, sooner or later, a tale of discord between brothers will play out. There are no siblings within the imperial family. That has been true all throughout history. It isn't uncommon. The crown prince's personality is a bit weak, but should he ascend the throne, I trust that he'd be able to follow in his father's footsteps," said Shen Xiao. "However, it's hard to say the same for Yang Guang. When I try reading his features—" He shook his head and didn't continue. Instead, he said, "Sometimes it's not good to be too clever. Those who are clever believe that they're the only person in the world who matters. This makes them even more isolated and lonely, which will eventually result in a great deal of anguish and trouble. In the end, they become a burden to both themselves and others. Changing the crown prince would bode poorly for both the Yang family and the world itself." Yan Wushi burst out laughing. "Ah, Qiao, are you talking about me?" Shen Chao shot him a look. "Are you like this, Sec Leader Yan?" "Not at all," said Yan Wushi. "After all, I'm much cleverer than Yang Guang." Shen Chao couldn't keep a straight face. He laughed, and his eyes curved into crescents, a sight to melt the heart. Even if a tempest raged around them, as long as someone saw this smile, no challenge would feel too great, and the world around them would seem to warm. That was what Yan Wushi thought. "That Yushu isn't as simple a character as he looks," Shen Chao said. Yan Wushi, with this beauty in his arms, had already moved on to considering tonight's plans. Which location should they choose in order to deepen their passion? "Of course he isn't," he said carelessly. "I've already had Bian Yanmei investigate him. Currently, the news I received says that he's the same as Duan Yang, a child with both Gokturk and Han blood." "He has Gokturk ancestry?" Yan Wushi nodded. "This matter is most intriguing. Someone with Gokturk ancestry enters a Buddhist sect, becoming a disciple of Buddhism. Yet he also accompanies the Prince of Jin, their relationship murky and ambiguous. A relationship between the Sui dynasty and the Khaganate is also an ugly one. Yet there's a half Gokturk monk by the Prince of Jin's side. What do you think he means to do? Isn't this incredibly intriguing?" This was quite a shock to Shen Chao. "You're saying that Yushu and the Prince of Jin have that kind of relationship?" Yan Wushi countered. "Did you seriously fail to realize?" Shen Chao was still digesting the information. "I really never thought in that direction." Yan Wushi sputtered a laugh. "If you didn't notice, clearly you lack experience." Shen Chao stared at him. "There's nothing for it. This venerable one has no choice but to wear myself out once again. I'll use my body to instruct you properly." Shen Chao could say nothing. Side Story 4. Shen Chao wasn't sure if Yushu was really in an illicit relationship with the Prince of Jin. Perhaps Yan Wushi had simply disliked him on sight. But these were all minor and inconsequential details. What was truly important was that Yan Wushi's words had revealed a key piece of information, one that linked the Khaganate, the Buddhists, and the Prince of Jin into one, and from this, Shen Chao discovered an issue he'd never noticed before. The current crown prince, Yang Yong, didn't hold Buddhism in high esteem. He preferred to debate and discuss with Confucian scholars on their classics and principles. The Buddhist sects didn't wish for their influence to end with Yang Jian's generation, though, so they took a gamble on the next and sent an outstanding disciple from one of their sects to foster good relations with the Prince of Jin. This wasn't strange. If Shen Chao hadn't disliked the Prince of Jin himself, he might have been pleased to see Shiwu and Yuan Song grow friendly with him as well. The strange part was Yushu's Gokturk ancestry, and it was very possible that the Buddhist discipline themselves knew nothing of this. It really made one's imagination run wild. Shen Chao sank into contemplation as he murmured, "Could it be a coincidence?" "Yushu lost his mother when he was 5, and he entered Tiantai sect at 7, said Yan Wushi. There's only a wall separating Ronghe village from the lands beyond the Great Wall, so the Gokturks plundered them year after year. Yushu's origins were not secret. When he turned 6, a great drought descended upon Ronghe village and killed many people. The survivors were forced to leave, and because of that, Bianyame was able to follow those faint trails and learn about this. What's even more interesting is that by the time the drought arrived, he'd already disappeared from Ronghe village. Shun Chao knew that the story didn't end there, and he quietly waited for Yan Wushi to continue. After his mother's death, the villagers ostracized him. Yan Wushi went on. He vanished one night. Even after the drought came and left, he never showed up again, so the villagers all assumed that he'd either left and starved to death or been carried off by some vicious animal. Such a young child was able to travel thousands of miles from the north to the south and arrive safely at Tiantai sect. That should be all but impossible, unless someone was helping him throughout the journey. And the person who helped him was a Lady Yuan. Which Lady Yuan? Asked Shen Chao. Princess Da Yi. Shen Chao was stunned. Princess Da Yi was once an honored princess of northern Zhou. During that time, she'd married into the Khaganate and became the wife of Ishpara Khagan. With her encouragement, the Khaganate and the newly established Sui dynasty had warred with one another, and the Khaganate was defeated. After Ishpara Khagan's death last year, in accordance with Gokturk customs, she'd married Tulan Khagan. Even now, she was still a Gokturk Khatun. Lady Yuan sees Yang Jian as a traitor who toppled the Zhou dynasty, so she's eager to get rid of him. However, since she doesn't have enough power, she can only bow her head to Yang Jian for now, while plotting for the future. This Yushu is one of the secret pawns she prepared. Lady Yuan bore a deep-seated grudge toward Yang Jian, born of grievances over her family and nation. Though her plans of instigating the Khaganate into going to war with the Sui dynasty had fallen through, she was unwilling to drop the matter since she still had connections to Yushu. In fact, she'd even changed her strategy, using more covert methods to destabilize the Sui dynasty's foundations. The Sui dynasty was currently in excellent condition. Even if they declared war on the Chun dynasty and marched their army southward, their victory would be just around the corner. The time for the Sui dynasty to unify the lands was imminent now that the Gokturks were suffering from civil strife and thus incapable of fighting back. However, Sui's internal affairs weren't entirely devoid of weakness either. For example, the issue between Yang Jian's two sons, Yang Jian and Lady Dugu's favoritism for their second son, together with Yang Guang's own burning ambitions, meant that a dispute over the position of crown prince was inevitable. If Yushu could counsel Yang Guang, helping him to conquer the throne, he would be sure to obtain Yang Guang's trust. Then, he could slowly, bit by bit, impose his influence upon him. Reasonably speaking, the lands should see unification within Yang Jian's generation. So, the next emperor's task would be to secure the fruits of Yang Jian's victory, consolidating the various powers. But with Yang Guang's temperament, it was unlikely that he'd be satisfied with being ruler who only maintained his predecessor's achievements. If someone fanned the flames when his time came, it wasn't difficult to imagine how the situation would develop. Shun Chao's experiences over these past years had affected him. It was rare to see him grasp such torturous affairs with perfect clarity. As he pondered this matter, he couldn't help but gasp in surprise. Every step has been planned out and reinforced. A strategy that will come to fruition as easily as waters flowing through a canal. On the outskirts of the capital was Cuihua Mountain. Two people stood at its treacherous summit, facing the wind as they gazed down at the capital. The location was jagged and craggy, the terrain slanted. Even if the scenery on Cuihua Mountain was beautiful, officials and nobles still preferred to build their villas at the foot of the mountain, or the halfway point at most. As such, there was little human presence here, but the dense forests and faint birdsong prevented it from feeling desolate. The winding landscapes of the mountain's foot was exquisite. Ever since Yang Jian had ascended the throne, Chang'an had grown more prosperous by the day. They saw that the golden age was imminent. Yet Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi could already appreciate what would happen 10 years or even decades into the future. Yan Wushi stood with his hands behind his back. Lady Yuren's plot is no small one, he said coolly. Unfortunately for her, even if she topples the Sui dynasty, what does it matter? The Yuan finally no longer has any talents who can take back their country. What can a single woman who has married into the distant cognate do? It's laughable and pointless, that's all. Shen Qiao sighed. But this bit of peace for the common folk doesn't come easily. I really don't wish to see it destroyed. Yang Jian is an outstanding ruler. Unfortunately, the Sui dynasty's good fortunes won't last long. They won't continue beyond the second generation. Why are you so certain? Asked Shen Qiao curiously. Yan Wushi asked in return. Ah Qiao didn't object. Doesn't that mean you agree with my words? Xuandu Mountain has hundreds of years of legacy as a Taoist sect, and they've dabbled in fortune-telling through facial features. I have observed Yang Yong's face. He is excellent in wealth and honor, but has none of the signs of a ruler. Meanwhile, Yang Guang overflows with auspicious qi, and he's also blessed with the 9-5 orientation, the sign of an emperor. Yet, he shook his head and didn't continue. Yan Wushi smiled. In truth, there's no need for you to perform divinations or read their features. You see, if anyone wished to topple the Sui dynasty, they'd find a way to enthrone Yang Guang. His personality is diametrically opposed to Yang Yong's. If he became emperor, he'd strive to achieve something grand. It wouldn't matter if it was Yushu or some other random person. When the time came, they'd only need a single foreign war, draining the common folks' resources and creating dissatisfaction in the low levels. Furthermore, Yang Jian's adjustments to the bureaucracy and establishing the imperial examinations have already offended the gentry. Once it happens, the aristocrats and commoners will oppose the emperor together. A lucky break won't be able to save this dynasty. It's inevitable it will be replaced. Shaken by the scene Yan Wushi had described, Shen Qiao was quiet for a long time. Though his words were enough to shake all of heaven and would have astounded anyone, that didn't mean they were impossible. The dynasty hadn't granted Yan Wushi any official position, but few people in the world could match his views in viciousness. Now, the more pronounced Shen Qiao's cultivation grew, the more proficient his divination became. The tiny glimpses of heaven's design that he'd seen confirmed everything Yan Wushi had said. First destiny, second luck, and third feng shui, he said. These are the factors that determine one's life. A person's destiny might be predetermined and inevitable, but luck comes from the Houtian after birth. It may still be possible to turn things around. If Yang Guang is willing to behave himself and rid himself of his malice toward us, Huan Yuesek can continue collaborating with him even if he ascends to the throne, said Yan Wushi. However, if he nurses a grudge toward us for our unwillingness to befriend him and seeks an opportunity for revenge, then all those lurking threats around him will become crises that will backfire on him in the future. Understanding dawned on Shen Qiao. So that's why you didn't touch Yushu. Yan Wushi smiled. That's right. When you look at it this way, what does Yushu's background have to do with us? Shen Qiao released a slow breath, then returned his gaze to the distant scenery. Currently, Huan Yuesek took orders from Yang Jian, but theirs was a relationship of cooperation, not subordination. Yang Jian knew this very well, so his collaboration with Yan Wushi was a pleasant affair. Yan Wushi, in turn, was happy to remove troubles and threats for him. But if Yang Jian's successor failed to understand this, there was no way someone with Yan Wushi's character would keep old affections in mind. If possible, Shen Qiao would naturally wish for the world to remain peaceful, for the chaos of war and the agony of separation to never again happen, for the common people to enjoy their lives in peace. But he also knew very well that this was impossible. Just as every person possessed a lifespan, dynasties too had their own destinies. Perhaps it was the Sui dynasty's destiny to last 100 years, or maybe only 50. Such things weren't determined at the founding of the dynasty, but would change as each ruler made their decisions, accumulating blessings and fortunes both that would intertwine and offset each other. Thus, they'd influence the rise and fall of the dynasty. The lingering blessings Yang Jian had left for his descendants, how many years could they buy for the Sui dynasty? Shen Chao couldn't help but wonder. He thought that he'd finally supported a wise ruler onto the throne, but perhaps it had only been the beginning. He felt that it was a pity, but then he also quickly grew relieved. The tides rose and fell, the clouds gathered and scattered, the flowers bloomed and withered. It'd always been this way, from the genesis of the world. As long as one could face this fact with a peaceful mind, they would remain undefeated. "What are you thinking?" asked Yen Wushi. Shen Chao smiled. "I was considering heading north in the next couple of days. I heard that there are many fantastical mountains and landscapes, the kind you'd imagine at the end of the skies and seas. Such impressive scenery is worth a look, and one can even watch the vast and magnificent ocean tides. I trust that it'll be beautiful beyond words." Yen Wushi raised an eyebrow. "Taoist Master Shun is going alone?" "Would Secular Yen be willing to accompany this humble Taoist?" "This venerable one shall consider it." Shen Chao couldn't help but find it amusing, and the corners of his lips stretched upwards. In the distance, the heavens stretched high and far, brimming with vitality, while the mountains and rivers sprawled forth, endless and exquisite. This was the dawn of a new dynasty, as well as the dawn of a new era. Perhaps there is chaos within, but there was also an even greater radiance. 25 years ago, Xuandu Mountain. "I'm older than you, so you must call me Shi Xiong." Yu Ai was holding onto Shen Chao's robe, preventing him from leaving. While Shen Chao struggled to continue walking forward, Yu Ai trailed behind him like a little duckling, and the two of them entered the main hall, one in front of the other. "I won't. Xuandu Mountain's rankings are based on time of entry. I'm the Shi Xiong." Though little Shen Chao was gentle, he refused to budge a single bit when it came to this. There was a ripping noise. Yu Ai had used too much force and torn Shen Chao's robe. The two of them were instantly dumbfounded. When he saw Shen Chao's reddening eyes, Yu Ai scrambled, at a loss. I didn't do it on purpose." Shen Chao sniffled. "Someone gave me this robe." A warm palm rested on his head and gave it a pat. Then its owner crouched down and pulled both Shen Chao and Yu Ai into his embrace. "What's wrong?" As if he'd seen his father, Shen Chao buried his head into the newcomer's shoulder and sobbed, "Yu Ai ripped my robes." Knowing that he was wrong, Yu Ai lowered his head and was quiet. Tifeng consoled them both. "It's fine. It's only a hole. That's all. This master will patch it for you later. Today, the disciple of your Lin Shibo, Zhou Shishong, is about to head down the mountain for training. You can send him off on this master's behalf. Dry your eyes quickly." Shen Chao was a good child. Hearing this, he quickly raised his sleeves to wipe at his tears. Then he raised his head and asked, "Will it be dangerous for Zhou Shishong to head down the mountain?" "Not at all," said Tifeng. "Your Zhou Shishong's martial arts are enough for him to protect himself. Though our Xuandu Mountain doesn't involve ourselves in outside affairs, if a disciple takes the initiative and asks to descend the mountain for training, they will naturally be allowed to do so. We don't insist that they must always stay and practice on the mountain." Hearing these words, Shen Chao and Yu Ai couldn't help but show expressions of envy. In their eyes, being unable to descend the mountain for training meant that they'd attained a certain level in their martial arts. "Shi Sun, in the future, will we be able to do the same thing as Zhou Shishong and head down the mountain for training?" Tifeng smiled. "Of course you can. Once you turn 15, you can head down the mountain yourselves. After leaving the mountain, what do you want to do?" Yu Ai snuck a glance at Shen Chao, then averted his eyes at top speed. "I want to go down and earn money so I can purchase a tangzhen for Ah Qiao. Make him happy so that he won't be mad at me anymore." Truly the words of a child. Tifeng burst out laughing. "Then what about Ah Qiao?" Shen Chao thought for a moment. "I'd probably use the martial arts Shi Sun taught me to help good people and beat off the bad ones. But can I return after only a month?" How could one determine who was good or bad? Again, the words of a child. But Tifeng didn't douse his enthusiasm and instead gently asked, "Why only a month?" Shen Chao was a bit embarrassed. Because I don't want to leave Shitsun and my siblings for too long. I wish that everyone can be happy together for a very long time. The wind blew past, rustling the trees and flowers, preserving these words of his within the ages. Though the grass and trees are silent, feelings linger forevermore. The end. All right, everyone, that concludes all four side stories. Just so you know, I said the end because that's how it's written in the book, but we do have like 6 chapters left or 6 extras left. I don't really have a lot to say about these side stories. I thought they were a little interesting as far as bringing the prince Yang Guang into the picture and just noticing his character and Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao having conversations about the future, what that looks like. Considering that they are two prominent people right now under Yang Jian or Puliru Jian, I think it's good that they're having conversations about the future. They'll be fine either way, but it's nice that they're considering like, okay, what's stuff going to look like for the common folk in the future, or what are things going to look like in general. One thing I do like about Puliru Jian or Yang Jian is I do think he's very smart in his approach, which I think it was mentioned before, but smart in his approach on basically not showing too much favoritism between Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Like clearly he has a preference, but he's making sure to provide enough attention and like rewards to the other two that there isn't this dynamic of, okay, we need to fight to rise our influence. You know, he's keeping that balance, which Yuan Yong didn't do when he was emperor. Unfortunately, it's sad to know that that wisdom he has as far as those disciplines isn't translating to his sons. You know, he clearly is showing favoritism to a prince who isn't even the crown prince, which is crazy, but whatever. It would be interesting to see how those things go. Of course, we're not going to get that full story, but yeah. Let's see. The other thing that I wanted to talk about. Oh, yes. First off, I don't like Yang Guang. I'm going to just say that because of the little segment where it basically talked about that he felt like his parents paid Shen Chao back enough with favors and stuff for saving his life. And so he doesn't have any gratitude towards Shen Chao. To me, it's like, even if you thought that everything was given to Shen Chao, that you didn't have to pay him back anymore, or your parents didn't have to pay him back anymore, you yourself should still be grateful because you could have been dead. Like, excuse you. No one is saying that every time you see Shen Chao, you have to be like, oh, you're my savior. Thank you for saving my life. But you don't have to have this sense of entitlement like, oh, you saved my life. My parents rewarded you. Now you should be doing what I want you to do. If anything, I mean, it's squashed. He saved your life. Parents gave him rewards. That's the end of that. So anything you want to do further with Shen Chao, you have to earn your own merits. And unfortunately, it looks for you at least, Shen Chao don't really want to mess with you. So, I mean, but anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and we only have 2 videos left. Oh my god. And then we'll be done with Thousand Autumns or Tianqiu. I don't know how to feel about this. But regardless, once we're done with this, we'll be moving on to Stars of Chaos, also known as Sha Po Lang. So you all have a wonderful day or night, sweet dreams, or, and I'll see you next time. Well, I, Neiman.